been studying different features of the system Verilog assertions in the last couple of classes. In the last class we looked at two types of constructs, namely repetitions, and then we looked at the on, and, or, and intersect kind of logical operators. Today we will start by looking at another very interesting feature which is there in system Verilog assertions. This is called local variables. So, in all that we have studied so far, we have only looked at propositional variables. In other words, all the variables, all the symbols that we have used so far, they are all propositions, right, like p, q, r, etc. Now, for the first time, we are going to look at variables like x and y here, which are not propositional variables, in the sense that they do not have Boolean values, right. And this is a interesting departure, because now we are not in the propositional temporal logic anymore, rather we have introduced certain variables which can have real values, right. So, let us see why this is useful. So, suppose we want to say for a particular q that if x and y are any two data items such that x was pushed into the queue before y, then x will come out of the queue before y. So, this is the first in first out property, that in whatever sequence the data goes in is also the sequence in which the data should come out. And in order to encode such a property, obviously x and y can be any two data items, right. So, it has to be a placeholder. It has, for x and y we need some symbol for the real values of x and y through which we can express this property. So, let us see how we express it in system Verilog assertions. We write property FIFO check, then we declare two variables int x and y, all right. Now, after declaring this, let us see how we are using them. So, in this queue there is one signal called get, one signal called put, and there is a signal called queue full indicating that the queue is full, and we have the data in and data out. So, when you want to push something into the queue, you put the data in here and then raise the line put, okay. Then the data gets entered into the queue. When you want to pop something from the queue, then you raise get and data out produces the head of the queue, right. So, that way this is how this queue works. Now, let us see how this property is encoded here. We are writing put and not queue full. What does that mean? That you are pushing something into the queue and the queue at that point of time is not full. So, the push will succeed, and x is equal to data in. Now note here, important thing is that this is a single equal to. So, it is an assignment. So, what we are saying is that when we are putting, when we are raising the put signal and the queue is not full, then let x be the data in, okay. So, we are storing data in the variable x, and then we are saying that suppose hash 1 comma dollar means what? It means that from the next cycle onwards, sometime in the future, if we again put, again it is not queue full, and let that data be y, right. So, this whole thing is expressing the statement that if x is entered into the queue before y is entered, in other words, we enter x into the queue and after some amount of time we enter y into the queue, then sometime in the future we get, and data out is x, and then again sometime in the future we get and the data out is y. Okay. So, what are we essentially saying? That if we push them in this order, they are going to come out also in this order, right. Now, note one very important thing, that this is a single equal to, and this one or this one is a double equal to. So, this is where the local variable is being updated, and this is where the value of the local variable is being compared, right. So, let us see what effectively is done while checking this property. So, at some point of time my get goes high, my put goes high, let us say this is put, right, and let us say at that time there is some data that is pushed in, then this says that again somewhere in future if put again goes high, and at that time you have another data in, and let us say at this time the data in was, let us say for the, let us say it is 256, and here the data in was 35, right, and then this says that there is some time in the future where get will be high, and at that time data out will produce some value, and sometime again in future get can go high, and again so this is, so what is going to happen is that whenever you have these data ins, they are going to get stored in the local variable. So, when we encounter this data in, there will be a copy of x which is going to store this, and then there will be a copy of y which will store this, right, and then this property that we saw just now will match if somewhere we find that this is x coming out and somewhere we find that this is y coming out, all right, only then this is going to match. Now, see, typically there can be lots of data that is going into the queue all the time, right, and there will be lots of data which is coming out of the queue all the time during the use of the queue. Then which x is going to get stored? So, actually what will happen is that for every x that is, for every value that is pushed in, there will be one copy of x which will become, which will represent this, right. So, for every pair of data that is pushed into the queue, there will be one instance of this property checking, where the first push will be represented by x, the second one will be represented by y for every pair.
That means the previous data that are entered, and if they are not pushed out, then they will be lost.
No, see, what this is saying is that if they are pushed in a particular order, they will appear in the data out also in that order. That is what the FIFO property says, right. Now, what we know is that if you look at every consecutive pairs, and if this property holds for every consecutive pairs, then it holds for the entire thing also, right. So, suppose I have A, B, C, D, E, if they go in this order, and then I ensure that this property holds for A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, then we know that effectively that if that order pairwise order is preserved, then the entire order will also be preserved.
So this
Right.
code is just defining the property.
This is only defining the property, right. Yes. Now, see, the way that we have written the property, we did not put that this data in is the one which is immediately after this one. We did not say that. We just said hash hash 1 comma dollar, right. We just said hash hash 1 comma dollar. So, we are saying that it is not necessary that this put and this put are consecutive puts. Do you get my point? These two puts may not be consecutive puts. There can be other puts in between also. The property does not say that these two will have to be consecutive puts. So, for every pair of puts, no matter whether they are consecutive or not, this has to be checked.
So you're basically defining FIFO in another way, like for a pair of data, then using that property.
Right. So, I am saying that the FIFO property is that for every pair of data, every pair x and y of data, if x goes in before y, then eventually x will come out before y, right. So, that is the FIFO property, and that is exactly how this one has been expressed. Now, I am trying to show you that from the point of view of checking this property, you see, for every pair of data this property has to be explicitly checked, right. Whereas, on the other hand, if we could somehow say that these two puts are consecutive puts, then the number of pairs becomes order n, if n is the number of data. Here it is order of n square. Yes. Yes. You mean if there are repetitions of data? Yeah, but if this holds for every pair, then the FIFO property is guaranteed. See, if there are two 256 and they are swapped, it does not matter, they are both 256 only. See, the queue is only storing values, right. So, if there are repetitions of the values, there is no harm in that.
But sir, there may be other conditions like in case of the FIFO, when we apply some put signal, in that case the output should be available throughout the time until the put signal again goes high. But in this case, we are not defining that that when the put signal goes down, then the buses should be in the high impedance state for the data.
No, we have not said anything about the the transition of the put signal. All we are saying is we know that whenever put is high, whatever data is there in data in is getting added into the queue, right. Now, whenever put is low, we have nothing to check, then data in becomes do not care, right. Now, whether there is actual data there or whether it is in try state does not matter, because when put is low we do not even look at data in, right? The queue does not read its inputs at that time, right. So, that is why what this put and not queue full represents is those cycles where you are successfully writing the queue.
But sir, in case of the value of whenever we write some code, so at that time we give that at the positive edge of the clock, you just assign this value to this variable. So in that case, the data is available once there is any event occurs on the clock.
Right.
But in this case, the event has occurred once, but after that means as the get signal or the put signal goes low, at that time we don't know that what are the contents on the bus.
We do not care also. When the get signal or put signal goes low, at that time the contents of data in and data out are not of interest to us. Right. What this property is saying is that when the put is high, then if x and y are the data that are pushed respectively, then finally there should be some future time where you will get x, and then again sometime in future when you will get y. That is all that this is. Now, does it answer your question? Right. Now, so this is local, the use of local variables, right? And local variables is a very interesting feature of system Verilog assertions. And as you might imagine, that checking these local variables in formal verification becomes really a problematic thing, because there are so many values that has to be considered all the time that it becomes quite difficult, and there is still a lot of research going on how to really check specifications having local variables using the formal verification setting. When we
Is this code taking into account the situation when we are having put and get alternatively?
when you are having put and get alternatively,
Yeah.
X coming in and X going out. Then Y coming in.
that's a good question. What he is asking is that suppose we put something and then get that out, and then again put this thing, then what might happen is that the x, you may never get another cycle where x gets out, right? That's what your question is, right? Yeah, that's definitely worth thinking. So let me reiterate the question. What he is saying is that suppose we have a put where x goes in, and then before you put the y in, right, suppose we have already taken x out, right? Now if we take x out, then we will never get a future cycle where x is data out, right? And then again you will have to wait until I mean you will not get x out, so this property will essentially fail, right? So we must somehow say that there is no get in between, then this is going to hold, right? That's a good thing, because that actually reduces the number of variables, because you are only saying that this holds when there are puts in succession, right? No, left hand side will be true, because you will have some put and again in future another put. See, this only says that this is 1 comma dollar. So in future at some point of time you can have another put, right? But then this says that after this has matched. Now see, the problem here is that in SVA, after this is matched, then the matching of this one is going to start from the next cycle, because we have hash 1, right? So if there was some get which removed x from the queue, then we are going to have a problem, because then you may not ever get x out, because it is already has been taken out, right? So in that case we have to rewrite the property so that we make sure that there is no get that takes place in between these two puts.
So what kind of variables are put here in data in data?
So these are Boolean variables. These are the signals to indicate that you want to get something or put something. Okay. Right. So any other questions on local variables? You think it over, later on we can again have discussions on this. Okay. Now so far we have only studied sequence expressions, and we have seen how to write properties out of that. Now in System Verilog, properties can be used in 3 different forms. It can be used as an assumption, as a checker, and as a coverage specification. And the general syntax of a property is like this, that you have property P at passage clock or at passage of any clock or at any event, we have sequence 1, which is some sequence expression and n property. This is a typical structure of a property. Now, what do we mean by assumption, checker and coverage specification? That is what we are going to look at in the next few slides. Now, before we go into that, there are a few other things that we would look into. First of all, we can use if then else also in the property. So, you can write a thing like property P at passage clock, if R1, then after one cycle G1 and not R1, else after one cycle G2. So, this is as the property suggests that we match R1, and if R1 matches, then in the next cycle we look for G1 and not R1, and if R1 does not match, then we look for #1 G2, that is we look for G2 in the next cycle. Now, this condition of the if cannot be a sequence expression. This has to be something which can be evaluated in the same cycle. So, in other words, this can only be a Boolean formula. It cannot be a temporal formula. It cannot have any #1s or anything like that. Right. So, it is not okay to write something like this, that if R2 #1 not G2 and R2 #1 not G2, then #1 not R2. You cannot use, this is not permitted in the syntax of SVA. So, for expressing properties of this nature, we use the implication operator, which we have already seen, that you write R2 #1 not G2 and R2 #1 not G2 implies #1 not R2. Right? So, this is implication. Again, there are two types of implication. One is the one that we have seen so far, namely one which looks like this. This is called the overlapped implication operator, in the sense that the match of S2 starts from the same cycle as the one in which we complete a match for S1. Right? So, that is why you may have seen that we put a #1 here to indicate that not R2 must hold in the next cycle. Right? So, if this expression, this one matches in some time t, then it will match not R2 at t plus 1 because of this #1. If we did not give this #1, it would have tried to match not R2 in the same cycle as the antecedent had matched. So, if the antecedent had matched at time t, it would have tried to match not R2 at the same time t. Right? Now, that's the semantics of the overlapped implication operator. And the non-overlapped implication operator, which looks like this, the match of S2 starts from the cycle after the one in which we complete a match for S1. So, here that #1 is implicit. So, if S1 matches at t, then the match for S2 will start at t plus 1. Okay. This one?
So, the matching occurs in the order from left to right.
Yes, always. So,
the #1 which we are giving, so that will consecutively add up as we go to it.
yes. So, R2 will match in some cycle, then you will skip one cycle and then match not G2 and R2, and then again you will skip one cycle, then you will match not G2. When you have matched so far, then this whole antecedent has matched, right? Then you go here and then you encounter the #1. So, you skip another cycle and then match not R2. If you did not give this #1, it would have meant that wherever this one had matched, you would have checked not R2 there, right? But if you use the non-overlapped implication operator, see, this is overlapped and non-overlapped. The name itself, is indicative of the meaning. This says that S2, the match for S2 will start in the cycle after the match of S1, one cycle after. Okay. There is another interesting construct which is used quite often, which is called disable if. So, suppose we want to express this property, y must be asserted within 16 cycles of x unless reset is asserted in between, right. Now, see what we have written. So, at passage clock, this part is the main property. This part says that if x is asserted, then within 16 cycles y should be asserted, right. So, this part is expressed here. Now, before that we have this disable if reset. This one says that the checking of this property will be aborted if reset comes anywhere in between. While you are matching this property, if a reset signal is asserted, then the checking of this property will be disabled. Right? This is a nice feature because you can express properties like this, that I want to check these things unless reset is asserted in between. So, I simply want to drop the checking of the property when some exception occurs, right. So, I can write the exception using the disable if statement. There are again two types of assertions that are used in SVA. The ones that we have been studying so far are called concurrent assertions, but you can also write immediate assertions. Immediate assertions are assertions which are plugged into the test bench code. So, within the code of the test bench you can write assertions, but the immediate assertions they do not support the temporal operators, they do not support any of the sequencing operators, right. So, they follow the simulation event semantics for their execution. So, whenever they are scheduled as per the simulation semantics of system Verilog, they are executed like a statement in a procedural block. So, you can write an assert with some expression and an action block, and the action block is executed whenever the expression is matched. It is as simple as that, right. But then this expression cannot be a temporal expression. On the other hand, concurrent assertions describe behavior that spans over time, and the evaluation model is based on a clock, because when we talk about time we need a clock to define what is the next time and the next to next time and so on. And values of variables used are the sampled values in the specified clock edge. So, we have seen concurrent assertions. So, this is just for your information that system Verilog assertions also support immediate assertions. In fact, immediate assertions are the assertions which came up several years before these concurrent assertions came up. Immediate assertions were used also with Verilog and its variants, and then when system Verilog standards were being set and system Verilog assertions got incorporated inside system Verilog standards, at that time this classification was made, that these are called concurrent assertions, these are called immediate assertions. These are called concurrent assertions because these are entities on their own, they are not residing anywhere within the control flow of the test bench, right. They are independent of the control flow of the test bench, they are independent of the path of the design and the test that is being traversed by simulation, right. So, they are independent entities which are getting monitored all the time, that is why they are called concurrent assertions. Now, let us come back to the usage of properties. We will see that properties can be used as assertions or guarantees. We call them assert properties. This means that when we write an assert property, this means that the design that we are testing is required to satisfy that property. If the design does not satisfy the property, then we have found a bug. but then a design will satisfy a property only when it receives valid inputs, right. Now, what do we mean by valid inputs? Therefore, there is some constraints on the environment behavior also. There is some constraints on the way the inputs are coming, right. Now, to facilitate the expression of the input constraints, we have what are called assumed properties, right. These are assumptions about the behavior of the environment. Now, though we primarily look at assumptions as constraints on the environments, they can also be assumptions on the design. Why? Because in order to make the verification task simpler, we often do the following thing, that we check some property, and then to check another property, we already know that this property holds. So, we say that we assume that this property holds and we verify the next property. How does that help? The assumed property helps in pruning down the search space, right. It helps in pruning down the search space and check the other assert properties. Okay. Now, writing the assumed properties is a real big challenge, because think of a design. This is some component which we want to verify, right, and the actual design is huge, right. Actual design is huge, which has many other components. It can have buses, it can have interfaces with other components, right. Now, this is the rest of it, and this is our duty. This is the design that we want to test, right. Now, when we want to write assumptions, what we essentially want to do is that we want to cut out this module, isolate it from the rest of the world, and verify it using formal or simulation based techniques. Now, then its interaction with the rest of the world has to be modeled through these assumptions. We need to know what are the assumptions on these inputs that are coming into the DUT. Now, if you make the assumptions too strong, then what might happen is that you may be cutting out certain input scenarios which trigger your bug. Suppose there is a bug in the design. Now, for under certain inputs only, that bug is sensitized, in the sense that the output reflects the incorrect value only under certain input scenarios. If your assumptions are too strict, then you may end up missing the bug, because the input scenarios under which the bug is sensitized are blocked by the assumptions. If you make the assumptions too weak, then what can happen? You can get false bugs. You will get a bug, but then that scenario under which the bug came out may not actually appear in practice. You have used a too weak environment, in the sense that your environment constraints are too weak. So, you have admitted some invalid inputs also, and under those invalid inputs the property has failed. So, it is not a bug in the design, but it is that your constraints are not tight enough, right. So, see the problem here. If your environment constraints are weak, then you may get false bugs. If your environment constraints are too tight, then you may miss bugs, right. So, writing these environment constraints is a very important task, right, and that is what we try to do with what are called assumed properties. And then we can use properties to as coverage specification. Now see, remember that we were talking about moving from directed test generation to randomized test generation in one of the earlier classes. In fact, I had shown you a figure like this which says that in the traditional flow people start writing directed test bench, and as each of these test benches are written and run, some of the coverage improves, right. The coverage improves because we are covering more and more of the behavior. So each of these steps is the addition of a new test bench to cover another behavior, right. This was the traditional approach, and these days what we try to do is to develop a single random test bench which is generic enough to cover most of the scenarios, and building that test bench takes a lot of time, but once that is done, because it is a randomized test bench, it starts generating scenarios randomly. So the coverage suddenly starts jumping quite high, and then it climbs fast and reaches the same level of coverage as the directed approach in much less time. So this is the gain in the time that we get. This is the time axis. So this one reached this amount of coverage in so much time. We reached the same coverage in a less amount of time by using a randomized test bench. Now the problem of using a randomized test bench is that we need to monitor that what exactly has been covered, because it is randomly creating test cases. So we really do not know which scenarios have been covered, which scenarios have not been covered, right. So to monitor that coverage, there are various approaches. There are the traditional code coverage, line coverage, state coverage metrics. There are also what is called assertion coverage. What is assertion coverage? See, these assertions that we write are properties of interest. We want to make sure that the design works correctly under the scenarios that are described in these properties. So we need to make sure that the properties that we have written have actually been tested non-vacuously. What do we mean by a non-vacuous testing? So let us look at this one of these properties. Let us look at this property. Okay, this property says that if R2 is high, and then in the next cycle if R2 is high and G2 is low, and then in the next cycle if G2 is low, then this should hold, right. So what we want therefore is that this scenario should happen somewhere. If this scenario has never occurred during simulation, then actually this property has always passed vacuously. If the antecedent has never been matched, then we have never actually verified the property, right. So that means that there is a difference between the property being matched everywhere and the property being matched non-vacuously. Right? There may be no failures of this property during simulation, but that does not mean that we have checked this property. There may not have been any failures because there was no match of the antecedent. So always the property satisfied vacuously. Okay. So there has to be a check that this property was non-vacuously tested. That is what we refer to as assertion coverage. We want to not only write properties, but make sure that those properties are covered during simulation. To do that, we can declare these properties as cover properties, and then there is a scoreboard which will be kept to tick whether this assertion has been covered or not. Right. There is another problem that we must keep in mind, is that people make mistakes while writing properties. So they may have written an antecedent which is unsatisfiable. Now see the problem here. If your antecedent is unsatisfiable, then that property will always pass as true. because the antecedent will never be satisfied and it will pass non-vacuously, rather it will pass vacuously all the time, right. So, these properties are vacuous. So, we have to make sure that the properties themselves are, otherwise what will happen is you will run simulation forever and you will see that that assertion is never covered, right. So, it could be that it is depicting some very rare scenario which random simulation is not being able to hit, or it could be that your property has a problem, but it is it has an unsatisfiable antecedent, right. So, what we are going to do is, in the next lecture we are going to revisit these three types of property definitions: asserts, assume and cover, and then we are going to see that why these are useful in different scenarios, and finally we are going to look at some of the architectural styles for writing assertions. So, we will realize that writing everything in terms of assertions can be quite painful. So, today formal specifications are not only assertions, they are assertions and some additional structures, right. So, we are going to look at those things in the next lecture. Thank you.